All right, we're back here on Sportsline. Phone lines are open tonight, 737-7767. Complete bank of phone lines available for you. Going to get to the Titans in just a second. Couple thoughts, though, on the college football playoff yesterday when it comes to the Rose Bowl. That was a classic game. First time we've ever seen overtime in the Rose Bowl. But my lasting impression was that Lincoln Riley, the really good young Oklahoma head coach, he took the ball out of his best player's hands at the most important time of the game. He had the Heisman Trophy winner on the field in Baker Mayfield. And in critical situations late in that game, he took the ball out of his hands. They had a couple of different 3rd down and 2 opportunities, and they ran it. And they ran it with cute plays that got stuffed in overtime. Their first possession of overtime, when they ultimately settled for a field goal, they ran it on 3 consecutive plays. The third one was like an end around to a tight end that Roquan Smith stuffed out. When you have the best player on the field, if you're going to go down, you have to go down with him. You have to go down swinging with him. And I think when they got on that plane this morning and flew back to Norman, and when they sit there and think about this in the offseason, or in Baker Mayfield's case now, the rest of his life, they're going to think about how he didn't have the ball in his hands as that game was decided down the stretch. And it was a great game. Oklahoma played well. Credit to Georgia for the way they came back in the second half. For that defense to hold the Oklahoma offense to 1 touchdown in the second half and overtime is an incredible feat, as good as that offense is. But again, my lasting impression is going to be the fact that Baker Mayfield didn't decide the game. The Georgia defense was awesome, but it wasn't Mayfield going right at the teeth of them in overtime and at the end of that game. And I think if you're Oklahoma, you really would have liked to have known what the outcome would have been if that was the case. Maybe it doesn't change, but you'd like to know that answer. And then the other thing, as I mentioned it earlier, that squib kick before the half, I know that's what they were trying to do, as you see a lot. Put it on the ground, make them not have a return. They probably kneel on it. You go to halftime up 31-14. But the lack of execution from Austin Seibert, who's a really good kicker all around, kicks and punts, for him to hit a guy on the front line and Georgia to get the ball at midfield in position where one play and they get a field goal off, which they make. The difference between being down 3 scores in Oklahoma getting the ball to start the second half and down 2 scores and Oklahoma getting the ball to start the second half, absolutely massive swing in that game that is going to hurt for a long, long time. Sugar Bowl different because Alabama dominated much of it, but like the last couple of years, as much as Alabama played well in the first half, Clemson was in it. Alabama let them hang around despite incredible field position and a dominant performance in the trenches in the first half. And then in the third quarter, Clemson had a chance to put their stamp on the game. You get the fumble early, chance to tie it, settle for a field goal. Then you're driving on the next possession. I thought at that moment, this is where Clemson takes over the game. If they punch it in here, take the lead the way their defense is playing, that might totally swing this right here. But instead, you have the fumble or interception, however that was ultimately ruled. Deron Payne coming up with it. I thought a bad horse collar penalty, which gave them even better field position. Then they score on the pass to Payne. What a sequence of events for that big fella. And then immediately after that, they get the pick 6 that goes in. 14 points in 13 seconds. And instead of potentially Clemson taking the lead, it was Alabama 24-6. And that was your football game. Not the classic we saw the last couple of years between those two teams. And the big difference to me is there's no Deshaun Watson. The last couple of years when Alabama made a play or took a lead in that game, Clemson said, all right, big fella, you're our guy. You're our star. Go get this done for us. And he almost did the first year. He did do it the second year. Last night, Kelly Bryant, okay. But Kelly Bryant's not Deshaun Watson. And we saw that last night against Alabama. So now it's Alabama and Georgia. I think a lot of people around the country frustrated by an all-SEC matchup. But that's what we're going to have on Monday night. I said it before. I don't think Alabama was deserving to get into a 4-team field because they didn't win the division. They didn't play for a conference championship. They essentially got a bye in the toughest week of the regular season. And if you're going to sit out there as a football committee or a college football homer and say, well, the great thing about our sport and a 14 playoff is the fact that our regular season means more than any other sport's regular season. I like that in theory. But then you can't put in a team that doesn't win their division and has no real marquee wins to date. Now, Alabama won last night, and they proved this year's selection committee right because they may be the best team in the country. But that doesn't mean the process that got them there is right. Alabama right now may be the best team in the country. I think they probably beat Georgia on Monday night for the national title. But at the end of the season, given who they played, where they played them, and who they lost to, and what they didn't accomplish, they weren't one of the four most deserving teams to get in. And so if you want to get into that point where you're going to put in at-large teams because you think they're good, you think they're good enough to do what Alabama did last night, I think we have to talk about a different format. Whether that's 6 or 8 teams, you got to expand it. Because when you're talking simply of the merits of the regular season, you have an Ohio State team out there that won the best conference in America this year. And the Big Ten was the best conference in America. They had more teams in the top 25 by the committee's own metric. They went 7-1 in this bowl season, thanks only to Michigan's ridiculous collapse yesterday against South Carolina in the Outback Bowl. To not have the champion of that league even represented in the playoff, but to take a second team from a league that didn't win a division, didn't win a conference title, I think the Big Ten has a legitimate gripe right now. And I'm not saying that I think Ohio State's better. I've said this from the beginning. I think if you played them on a neutral field, Alabama probably wins. But if you're going to say that the reason we have such a limited playoff field, and this is what makes our sport so great, you've got to stand up to that. You've got to stand up to that fact and say, okay, we're going to preserve that fact, and if you're not good enough to win your division, you don't deserve in our 4-team field. Again, Alabama proved the committee right last night and may do it again on Monday night. But the process that got them in initially, I think, needs to be addressed at some point here. Because that is what makes college football special, the regular season. The fact that every week should mean something. The fact that winning division and conference championships matters a lot. And the committee this year demeaned all that by putting Alabama in. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next Monday night. I think it's going to be a great game. And I think ultimately we maybe do have the 2 best teams there. But I know there's some people in Columbus who'd certainly like the chance to dispute that. And they've got a decent argument about that they should have at least had a chance. And we don't know. We don't know what would have happened on the field. There were a bunch of people a few years ago who thought Ohio State had no chance against Alabama, and they won. And then there were a bunch of people the last couple of years that thought Ohio State had a really good shot, and they got blown out in the playoff. You don't know, obviously, until you play the game. But I think Ohio State's got a really good argument that they should have been in the field. Should have at least had a chance to prove that they belong. All right, to the NFL now. The Titans getting set for the trip to Kansas City on Saturday. 3:35 wild card game against the Chiefs. Thanks in part to a huge win with their backs against the wall, staring down the barrel at a catastrophic late season collapse. 3 straight losses in the month of December, giving them a must-win game against the Jaguars on Sunday at home. They rose to the occasion. They figured out a way to get it done. Again, it wasn't pretty, but Marcus Mariota kind of had his defining moments late in that game. The defense comes up with 4 turnovers. Kevin Byard 2 interceptions, and they get it done to go to the playoffs. We'll get into some of the keys to that game coming up in just a second, but first we have a phone call here. Good evening, David. You are our first caller tonight here on Sportsline. First caller of the new year, in fact.
Oh, well, first of all, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And I like your dressing this time than this dressing this time than the suit you've been wearing.
Well, thank you.
Let me see. What you have said, Alabama, if you apply the same thing to the NFL, you will see that some things in the playoff now shouldn't be there, because of who they played.
Yeah, but the only difference there is you're in straight off your record in the NFL. There's 4 division champions in each conference, and then there's 2 wild card teams that go in directly based off of what their overall record is, and then tiebreakers go down to division record, head-to-head record, conference records, things like that.
Yeah, but some divisions are too tough to come out of right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's always going to be fair, and I don't exactly know how you address that. But at least in the NFL, you're trying your best to compare apples to apples when you look at the records and the conference records and things like that. And sure, I mean, somebody's going to benefit from a little bit easier schedule than somebody else. But as opposed to college football where one team can schedule really difficult out of conference, other teams can schedule really easy out of conference, and then one team wins a conference championship, another team doesn't even win a division, and then you're trying to decide subjectively who the best team is. I think that gets really tricky there.
Okay.
All right, David, we appreciate the call. Thanks for the time tonight. Let's go to Woody. Woody, good evening.
Oh, hi. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well, thanks.
I just want to know. I heard the last team that ever went from a wild card that won the Super Bowl was the Kansas City Chiefs. Is that true?
I don't have that directly in front of me, but I'm pretty sure the Baltimore Ravens did that.
Well, I know they did it, but I think it was the Kansas City Chiefs were the last ones to go to a wild card and end up winning the Super Bowl. I think it was 5 teams.
Well, that certainly isn't since the Ravens. The Ravens did that just 3 or 4 years ago. So I think the Ravens are the last team to do that. I know the Giants did it in the year that they knocked off the Patriots, who were the unbeaten Patriots back in 2008. So it certainly happened. There are certainly cases where a hot team gets in. And look, the one thing about the NFL playoffs, people covet those buys, the home field advantage in the NFL playoffs, but sometimes that's a detriment.
Exactly.
If you get into the wild card and you're playing well, and then you win that first weekend, and now you just kind of keep on that roll, and you're playing a team that then has to come in cold. They didn't play the last weekend. They maybe have the jitters of the first playoff game. If you jump on them early, look out. And that we've certainly seen that a time or two, and that's what the Titans will tell you right now is, look, we got into the dance. However we got there, whatever you want to say, we got in, and now we have a chance, and they do.
Can we do it? Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Tighten up. You tell everybody, stand for them, tighten up.
Well, I think what we saw this weekend is when the chips were down and their backs were against the wall, the Titans rose up to the occasion, and I think this city did too. I mean, it was a gross day on Sunday. That was the coldest kickoff temperature in the history of Nissan Stadium, 23 degrees. It felt like it was in single digits much of the afternoon and into the evening as that game ended. The fans went out. They were there. It wasn't a sellout crowd, but it was a decent crowd. And it was a crowd that was loud, and it was a crowd that was involved in the game, and it was a crowd that helped the Titans out in that game. And when it was over, they celebrated just like the players did, because this is something that everybody in Nashville has been waiting for a long time. I am not particularly a fan of the team. It's my job to cover them on a daily basis. But I can tell you that it has been 7 long years covering this team that had 2-win season, a 3-win season, missed the playoffs narrowly a couple of times, and the frustrations that come with that, and dealing with guys that you end up getting an affinity for, guys that you think are good guys who battle their tails off trying to get to that moment, and finally Sunday they did. And so that was a huge moment for this franchise and the direction they're trying to go to, and I think a huge moment for sports fans in the city of Nashville. Now this week, we get to look forward to a playoff game. January football not here in Nashville in terms of the location, but for people in Nashville to enjoy for the first time since January of 2009. And that is something certainly worth celebrating. Let's go back to the phones now. Which line is that? Let's go to Melvin. Melvin, good evening. You're next up.
Thank you very much for taking my call. I appreciate it.
You bet.
And I'm a PFL holder, and I want to congratulate the Titans for getting into the playoffs. And number two, they sent some good stuff today. That's all you, the gift pack for the Titans game. But now I'm trying to see and want to understand. I'm with Henry and Murray, but I want to know why they haven't been playing running Henry all the seasons like they've been doing. Now, both of them I think is good running backs. But I think Henry, to me, is going to be the guy that's going to take them over the threshold.
Well, he probably is long-term just because he's a younger guy that they're going to build around into the future. But here's the thing, Melvin. On Sunday, DeMarco Murray was out with an injury. He may be out again this week.
I know that, yeah.
But Henry was the feature back on Sunday. He had a career-high 28 carries.
Yeah.
And he went for about 2 yards a pop. I mean, he just wasn't very good. He wasn't dynamic in that game in any way, shape, or form outside of the 66-yard touchdown reception that came in a pass play. And then, oh, by the way, how did the Jaguars get back into the game? There was that miscommunication on the fumble that led to a scoop and score by Jacksonville. That's Derrick Henry he didn't know the play. He ran into his quarterback, not where he was supposed to be. He caused the fumble that leads to a touchdown run back. And we've talked about it before that when you talk about these two guys and the versatility of them and what they can do, when it comes to third down and pass protection, DeMarco Murray has the check. When it comes to pass receptions, despite the catch on Sunday, DeMarco Murray has the check there. When it comes to just being an every down back, DeMarco Murray is still the guy they trust more than Derrick Henry because of plays like that you saw on Sunday. And because of that, he's the every down back. And when that's the case, he's going to get more carries. Now, Murray did not have a great year. Henry's maybe had a little bit better yard per carry year, and I think you'll continue to see him get more carries. But there's still some concerns about him being an every down back, and we saw the fruits of that on Sunday.
Are they trying to say that Henry is not a smart running back?
I mean, I didn't say that. What I'm saying is that he's still young in the NFL, and there are a lot of things you have to learn in terms of pass protection and who to pick up in various spots. And when you're a guy like Derrick Henry, who was a Heisman Trophy winner, his whole life has been about somebody handing him the rock and saying, go make a play. In the NFL, you got to be able to do more than that to play the running back position. DeMarco Murray's really good at that stuff. Derrick Henry's still learning that stuff. And so at this point, they trust the veteran more than they trust the young guy who's just in his second year. And whatever you want to say about Sunday's play, he screwed up. It was a mistake. He went the wrong direction. He runs over his quarterback, and it handed the Jaguars their only touchdown of the game. Those are the types of things you just simply cannot do at this level, and that is something that's holding Derrick Henry back right now.
Okay. Thank you for your info.
Yeah, thanks, Melvin. We appreciate the call. We got to take a break here. We will come back. More of your phone calls. More discussion on the Titans as we get set for playoff football. A wild card game Saturday afternoon in Kansas City. We discuss that and more coming up after the break right here on News Channel 5+.